Because you never know. Okay, so here's the deal. The assumption is we know what a WBS is. Tell me what a WBS is. Give me an idea, because that's the basis for all the stuff we're going to talk about today is time, right? So what does Rod say a WBS is?
Task list.
Pardon?
A task list.
Okay. How about, let's say it's work content. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but here's the deal. With a WBS, the goal is let's capture everything that has to be done, but let's put way on the back burner time and cost. Right? So, that silly example I always use is painting a room, because everybody's painted a room, right? And you go, we'll paint a room. What do we have to do to paint a room? Furniture, right? How about deciding on what color? Do we have to account for that time? You see what happens up the work, right? So what do you have to do? And then if we've got to get the paint, do we want to get the paint and have the same folks that get the paint, get the brushes, and get the, right? You see what, all of a sudden we get kind of crazy, right? When you start thinking about it. So we want to capture work, not thinking about time, because here's why. When we look at, a lot of times on a project, you'll see something that says 4 months of calendar time. But there's 4 people doing the work. So how much level of effort is there? 16 months. So if I remove 2 workers from that process, how much work is left, level of effort? 16, but what happens to my calendar? Double. You see what happens? And again, I know that's simple, but I want to make sure we don't forget that, because a lot of times what will happen in project management is we look at it as a calendar, and I want us to think about the WBS is the work that's got to get done. Once we understand that, then we can begin breaking it down. And one of my favorite ways of looking at project management is, my dad worked in the space program, and I had a chance to meet a number of people. Gene Kranz. I was a little kid. I even watched Apollo 14 roll up on the pad. I mean, I'm a goob when it comes to stuff like that. My dad was real involved in it. And I remember the movie Apollo 13, and Ed Harris plays Gene Kranz, going around the room, and he says, guidance, go. Electrical, go. Fuel, go, right? He says that. Now, if you've ever been to NASA down in Canaveral, the building sits up high and you see the control room, but really in that control room, there's an engineer, an engineer, an engineer. There's a whole floor down below of electrical and fuel and guidance, and there's hundreds and hundreds of people. Let me ask you that question. If you're in the way this thing works, there's a T-minus 90 seconds or an hour and a half, there's a T-minus 60, a 30, and a 15 hold, automatic hold. So at T30, you're about 2 hours from launch, right? And so when they do this kind of stuff, and he says, guidance, go, do you think there's anything going on in guidance that's a problem at that moment? Do you think everything's perfect? Right? Probably not. Probably there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. Why does the guy say go?
He's planning to have it taken care of.
Say that,
He's planning to have it taken care of.
There we go, right? So here's the thing. Here's the difference that people need to understand about project management, I think. Is this going to bother you right now?
No.
You're okay? I want to make sure you do.
Sue, Billy, and Fred might mind.
Here's the deal. And I just need to preface a couple of quick things so you kind of know where some of the nuts stuff that I say comes from, right? And I mean nuts as in crazy, right? Here's the deal. I think of this world in kind of a concentric set of, I won't call them squares, because that would be kind of abysmal with squares, right? So we have what's known as system. We have what's known as program. We have what's known as project. We have what's known as task. We have what's known as activity, right? And so in the world of project management, here's my guess. And I've happened to be a deputy project management in Zion, Illinois on the big teardown, $2 billion monster. That's the biggest project I've ever been on. It was a 12-year, it wasn't very ambitious. We were going to take twin nukes and turn it into a state park. They're almost done with it, right? It's kind of an ambitious little project. And so you think about big, big systems. Most of us, I'm guessing, if you're a project manager, you're probably doing some of the work too. I know on my projects, I'll be a project manager, but I'm doing the data work, and I'm doing this design piece, and I'm doing stuff, and I may have other people, but it's pretty rare to be a PM with nothing else to do, right? Does that make sense? And so we're kind of playing that game back and forth and all this stuff. We're being the project manager and we're being an SME, subject matter expert, right? I would imagine most of us are sitting right around here as an SME. Now, I could be wrong. You guys may be true, honest to goodness project managers. But here's the deal. Most of us have been on project teams. We've been team leaders, we've been engineers, we've been environmental scientists, we've been whatever it happens to be. And we're responsible for getting tasks done. And tasks are consist of a bunch of activities, okay? Here's the thing. Gene Krantz going around the room says guidance. This is what he's asking about, okay? There's all these other things going on down here that aren't quite done. And as you aptly said, there's things, but when he says go, that means T-minus 30, we're 1 hour out or an hour and a half out. We got these issues, and his team knows that, and they say, yeah, we got problems, but in 90 minutes we're ready to go, right? So when you do a meeting with your project team, and somebody says, how's it going, and you go around the room or whatever, and you say something, that doesn't mean it's perfect. It means it's manageable, right? We're managing what we need to do. We're going to be ready, right? You ever do that? You go into a wedding, you're going to a funeral, you're going to church, you're doing whatever, and you get a status check, and you see people run around the house putting clothes on and all kinds of things. You know, there's no way we're getting out of here, but somehow you do, right? That's project management, right? If you've managed a household, that's good. Now here's the thing. Most of us live on this interface right here. The interface between the project, between the task and the project. We're sitting here as an SME, doing task and stuff. We're responsible for activities and tasks. As a project manager, we move out one interface. We go out one level, and we're actually hanging out between the project and the program. Because as a project manager, one of the things I've got to be aware of is other stuff going on. Now, did he define what a program was? In a portfolio, did y'all talk about those things? Okay, when I was at United Parcel Service years ago, I worked 16, 17 years there in worldwide logistics and stuff, and cool things, lots of fun, delivering boxes, right? And so one of the things we got involved in is time motion study and all those kinds of crazy things. But one day they had a stock meeting and they decided, their headquarters was Greenwich, Connecticut. Other than being the heaviest taxed county in the United States, it also sits very near a little bitty place called the Arthur Ashe Tennis Stadium. And about 6 times a year, thousands of people show up for these, I don't know, tennis, I guess they're tennis matches, I think they're US Open, right? I'm kidding. And so all of a sudden, there's no place for executives to stay, no place for people to come in and visit. And UPS said, we're going to buy a hotel. Now what the heck is a parcel company? Anybody know what a parcel is? 70 pounds or less is a parcel, 71 pounds and higher is freight. Okay, US definition, right? So here's the deal. They bought a hotel. Why would UPS buy a hotel? That's stupid. Well, they bought it because they wanted a place for people to stay so they could have some rooms available. Now, UPS didn't want to run hotels, so they hired Marriott to run them. Well, they bought them there in Chicago and Atlanta and LA and various places like that. But they didn't want to run hotels. They wanted what hotels gave them, places to stay, right? That's a portfolio. A portfolio is something, you know, it's like having international stocks, or you've got your financial plan, and you've got T-bills, and you've got bonds, and you've got, you know, big stocks and small stocks and all that stuff. That's a portfolio. Well, the idea in a company is you have portfolios sometimes. You have things that go, you know, crazy things like a hotel for UPS. Kimberly-Clark here in town bought an airline. When I started out in college, I think it's Midwest or Midway, I forget. What was cool, they were DC-8s. I'm sorry, they were DC-9s. They were the small ones, the twin engine. They took all the seats out and put first class seats all the way through. And you know what made them unique? They baked chocolate chip cookies in flight. It's awesome. They served them on a glass plate and a glass of milk. Right? Big deal, whoop-de-doo. They bought an airline. Why? Oh, they flew to exotic places like Appleton, Wisconsin, and Houston, Texas. Why did they buy an airline? They had these, that's where their facilities were. And what they thought, they made a business decision. They said, we can buy a fleet of Lear jets, Or we can buy an airline. And what they did is they sold tickets to people when they weren't flying folks. And they didn't fly every day, it was like 2 or 3 times a week, but they made a little extra to pay for things, right? That's an example of a portfolio. The reason I'm saying that is portfolios are part of what's called a system. When you become a project manager, you sit on this interface and you're thinking about programs. And the reason I say that's important, you got portfolios. Portfolios are everything in the mix. A program, though, is like at NASA, the shuttle program. They don't launch to the moon, they don't do satellites, they don't do terra firma stuff, they don't do deep space, they do the truck, right, the space shuttle. So kind of, if you look at this, the system is NASA, the program is the shuttle program, the project might be STS-121, the task might be replace gyro, you know, in the Hubble, and the other one might be turn screw, right, when you get to the activity level. The reason that's important, and here's what we get into, and Rod will talk more about this when we talk about scope. When you're defining things, it's very important not to go too deep in defining. You want to not go too granular, because what you can do is spend a lot of time. For example, if Gene Kranz said, what's the O2 level for Neil Armstrong, right? Does he care about that? I mean, he does, but going around the room with all this stuff going on, does he want to know what the O2 level, or what's the blood pressure of Buzz Aldrin? Does he didn't care about that, right? Because that's not his job. And so one of the things we do in project management, and the reason this is important, we're going to talk about defining activities and things, we want to make sure that activities, who should define activities? If you remember how we placed you there. Exactly. So what happens is if I'm a contractor, building a house, a building, should I care if you're going to use a roller, a spray gun? Anybody ever watch Mythbusters? They've used dynamite, they've used sprinklers to paint rooms. They actually painted a room with dynamite. The paint did a good job. The problem was the room blew up. It was all pieces, but all the pieces got painted. I'm not sure the trade-off was worth it. But the point is, do I care as a contractor, other than if you do what you're supposed to, you have 2 coats of paint, pink, or whatever you're going to do? I don't care, do I? And so it's up to the painting contractor, the SME, to paint the room, right? It's up to the contractor to say, how many of the rooms are painted, right? That kind of stuff. Does that make sense? Again, probably basic stuff. I just want to make sure we all start off on the same page, right? Now, if you had talked about WBS and things, you would have defined it. He'll talk probably about, we like to do the sticky note version of WBS, right? My office is walls, floor to ceiling, wall to wall whiteboard. And I like writing on a whiteboard and sticking notes. My master's PhD is information systems. However, I love analog, especially with WBS, because you're always moving stuff around. Because you can do it by, like you build an airplane, you can do avionics and airframe and delivery systems and things like that, or you can do procurement, development, design, manufacture, or you can do, right, all kinds of ways. So when you're doing a WBS, when you're building your work breakdown structure, I like to be able to move things around. And then when you lock it in, take a picture. The problem, I think, is people jump into Excel or jump into Project or jump into Primavera, and all of a sudden you're locked in, and all of a sudden you have to think linearly. And most of us, unless you're, well, brilliant, most of us don't think that way, right? The William Faulkner stream of conscience kind of thing. And now my wife, there's Beethoven's and there's Mozart's. She's a classically trained concert pianist, played all over the world, done all kinds of crazy stuff. But here's what's interesting. I am a Beethoven. Has anybody ever seen some of the original manuscripts written by Beethoven? They look horrible. There's notes and scratch outs and all that kind of. Anybody ever seen Mozart's? He wrote them in pen, perfectly. That's my wife. Beethoven's me, right? I think out loud, I process out loud. She just thinks and thinks and thinks, and then out comes the Gettysburg Address, right? The thing is, and this is why all this is important as we're looking into this, it's important to capture both of those on your project team. Because you've got Beethoven's, you've got Mozart's. And the thing is, as you're developing your plans and you're thinking about what has to be done, we don't want to think about it in terms of getting it done sequentially. We'll do that later, right? Because if you say, well, I've got to buy supplies. I just said, okay, buy supplies. Are you going to send one guy out with one truck to visit 5 sites? Are you going to send 5 people out with 5 trucks to visit each, right? Those are, I don't care, do I? Because it may be on the day of, I've got no choice and I have to do it one way or the other. All I need to know is I've got to get drop cloths at Walmart, paint brushes at Sherwin-Williams, paint at Home Depot, and a ladder from whomever, right? And as long as I know that, later on we can sequence, and we're going to talk about that today. In time management is how we sequence it, right? Again, a little background, everybody good with that? Any questions? I just want to be sure we're all same page, right? So we're going to talk about project management. Fortunately or unfortunately, this is the largest of the knowledge areas. He told you, right? There's 10, 5 across, 47, all that kind of good stuff. This is chapter 6. It's knowledge area number 3. First one, anybody remember what that one was? Chapter 4 was integration, scope, time, and cost, and quality, and HR, and communication, and risk, and procurement, and eventually we get into what's called stakeholder management, right? And so it starts at chapter 4 and it goes to chapter 13. There's 10 of them, okay? And they start at 4 because 1, 2, and 3 are framework, right? And you went through that, right? What's a project? What's a program? You better remember the 4 kinds of structures in a company. Remember functional,
Matrix.
projectized, right? Matrix, that kind of stuff, okay? Does anybody remember the funky one? Composite. That's a functional organization. And my dad used to work at a company called Cooper Tools. They make Lufkin tapes and stuff. Their competition for Stanley. When they would do a project, they would bring somebody out of the organization to be the PM, bring people out of the organization to build a team. They'd tiger team it, do whatever they needed to do. When the project was done, everybody would go back to the organization. That's a full-blown projectized mini organization that rolls back into the function. That's a test question. I just want to make sure y'all know that, right? So here's the deal. Notice it says plan, schedule management, define, sequence, estimate resources, estimate durations, and develop the schedule. Anybody see a pattern? I don't know how many of these you've looked at. Anytime in the point 1 or the point 2, because there's actually 2 of them that have processes that are in what's called initiation, the feasibility world, okay? And that's stakeholder, identify stakeholders, and way up in integration, it's the chapter, I'm sorry, the chapter, the charter, right? Those are point 1s that are not planning, they're initiation. So the point 2 for those, for 4 and 13 are the plan. Plan, schedule, management. What do you think the output is there?
Schedule management.
Schedule management plan, right? All of those have got it. There are 16 components of the project management plan. All 16 come from those 10 knowledge areas. There are things like schedule management, the cost baseline, the cost plan, those kind of things. Now here's the thing that's important. Schedule management plan, what is that? Does anybody know? What would you think it is?
Schedule management plan?
Yes, sir.
How to manage the schedule.
Okay, how to make the schedule?
How to manage the schedule.
How to manage the schedule. Very important. So here's the thing, it's not the schedule. It's, let me ask you this, where you work, do you report, do you fill out a time card or any kind of a time system?
Yeah.
Okay, do you put down, I was here today, I was here this month, I was here for an hour, I was here for 1 minute? How do you all do it? When you fill out your time card or go into your time system, what's the level of detail? Okay, that's your schedule management plan. People shall report in 1 hour increments what you did, right? Why don't they have you report in 1 minute increments? What would you become?
Just doing that.
Administrative assistant that puts time in, right? So there's a balance in there, right? Let me ask you this. When you travel, do you give receipts for McDonald's and parking and Subway and dry cleaning and all that? Or do you do per diem? Why do you think you do per diem? The accountants want the penny, right? But if you're doing the penny, you're spending 16 hours doing an expense account, right? So we're always looking for balance, aren't we? We want to know detail, but the more detail I know, the less you do your job and the more you become an accountant, right? So keep in mind as we're running our way, and this is why the work breakdown structure isn't time, it's work content. You guys have to decide what's the level of detail I'm going to go down to, okay? And each one, Rod's probably mentioned the graded approach. I'm going to tell you all these tools, you go, who cares? Anybody do any finished carpentry? I love that, right? I love woodwork and crown molding. Anybody know what a coping saw is? It's not one you hold when you're having a tough time. It's one that if you've ever seen an inside 90, you cope off, or you take the relief to remove the mass so you can nicely and tightly fit the crown molding. It's a very specialized tool, but if you do woodworking, you got to know how to use it. You don't cut things with it. You don't cut fence posts, that kind of stuff. But it's something you need to know. A lot of these tools we're going to teach you are tools like the coping saw, right? You need to know how to use them. You also need to know when to use them. Does that make sense? So I don't want people coming here, especially folks that have been doing projects for a long time. They go, I don't need all this stuff. I believe you do, but I believe you need it in the right dose, okay? When I was a kid, loved to bake, still like to cook. I loved apple pie. And I thought, man, I love cinnamon. So the next time I made an apple pie, if a teaspoon of cinnamon is good, I bet a cup of cinnamon will be awesome. It wasn't, right? You got to know what to use, right? That's the important part of all the things we're teaching. So don't get blown away with all the stuff. Get blown away with when do you need that stuff, okay? And often you don't need these things, okay? And the last one I'll give you, everybody drive to work this morning? You did a risk management plan. Did you know that? When you got in the car? You did. What'd you do? You got in the car, and what's probably the first thing you did? If you have a teenager, what'd you do? Right? Turn the volume down. If you're young enough, you probably turned it up, right? Whatever. But you sit down. What do you look at? What's the thing you do? You put the key in. What do you do? If you have a family, you know you're going to have to go get gas because they always leave it empty, right? So you check the gas. Is that risk management? Sure it is. Okay. You look at the next oil change. You look at stuff like that. Now, did you call your pastor, your priest, your friends, and get around the car and have a prayer session and thank you, Lord, for the day and all those kind of? I'm not making fun. Did you all do that? Why not? That's important. Let me ask you this. What if you were going to get up this morning at 3 o'clock and drive to California? Would it be a little different plan when you got in the car this morning?
Yes.
Right? Does that make sense? That's the graded approach we're talking about, right? So some days you're driving to work, some days you're driving to California. That's how we kind of look at it, right? Enough said on that. The schedule management plan is telling you how you're going to do the schedule, how often you're going to update it, okay? Now, one of the things we're going to probably do is the planning money most people get is real small, okay? And a lot of people like to sit down and plan out the whole project. What's the problem with doing that unless you're building a house or a car?
You waste a lot of time if one little thing changes.
Exactly. So we do kind of this way of, it's called progressive elaboration. What are you going to do for dinner tonight? You're going to cook, you're going to go out, you're going to have friends over, you're going to have pizza delivered, right? You may have an idea. What are you going to do for dinner Sunday? Next Tuesday? How about on January 19th, 2018? I don't know, right? You see what happens? So what we do is we go to the grocery store and we buy stuff for today, tomorrow, maybe a week, right? And we do that. That's kind of the planning process. Now let me ask you this. If you're still alive and you're still functioning, do you think on July 19th, 2018, you're probably going to want to eat dinner?
Yes.
So you need to realize you're going to have, now what's that going to take? I'm either going to have to go get it, go out to eat, or fix it. So on January 20th, or whatever day I said, in 2018, right? I can't even remember the day. I need to make some time for dinner, right? So in my planning, in my 8 or 12 or 16 or 24-hour day, I need to realize that that's going to probably take me an hour or so to eat, and 30 minutes to an hour to prepare, and 15 to an hour to clean up, right? So somewhere between an hour and a half and 3 hours on the 19th in 2018, I've got to plan time for dinner. Does that make sense? So when we're doing our planning, our scheduling, I know I'm going to eat dinner. I'm probably going to eat lunch. I may eat breakfast, right? So I need to have those in my plan way out there. But I don't know all the specifics. Does that make sense? Because ordering a pizza or putting in a pot pie is different than making chicken marsala, right? So you with me on that? We're doing that graded approach thing. Now here's the deal. That schedule management plan tells us, let me ask you this. If you're a family of 2, do you cook a lot of meals probably? It's hard to do, isn't it, with 2? So you probably eat out more. You have a larger family with lots of kids and stuff, you're probably going to cook. Does that make sense? So the schedule management plan, you may have a family of 2. There's going to be some more consultants you bring in, more folks that are involved, more outside resources. If you've got 30 people on your team, you're probably going to do the in-house stuff, right? Again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I want us to understand where this thing's rolling, right? So that's the plan that lets us roll, okay? It's a processes, right? Time management. The plan is a subsidiary, it identifies the schedule, the method, the tool, all those things. That's what it's for. It's kind of the basics, okay? There's two kinds of ways that we do scheduling. We do what's called critical chain and critical path, right? Critical chain is going to be gold rat people, where you get in there and you look at resource-driven things and all that kind of stuff. You can have buffers and stuff. We'll talk a little bit about that. The critical path method, though, says I'm either going to do one of two things. I'm going to add up all my time and see what my end date is, or I'm going to go out to my end date and see what do I have to do to get it done, right? So, for example, if I'm doing research, I'm going to add up my time and find an end date. If you're getting married, you're going to pick a date and work your way backwards, right? It all depends. So again, the method we choose is going to be based on what kind of thing we're looking at, right? You have a deadline. If you're going to do a Christmas opening of a casino or something, you're probably going to have a soft start date and see what happens, and then you've got a few weeks to put stuff in, and then you're going to have the hard opening date, right? Those kind of things. So again, all that stuff comes in. That's what we're talking about, okay? You're looking at the way this works. Generally, we have three baselines, okay? We have what's called a cost baseline. We have a schedule baseline, all right? And we have a scope baseline, okay? And then we have what's called a risk plan. And the risk is sort of a baseline, because what we're looking at is all the things we're going to do, what level of risk, and Ryan will talk more about that, about risk and where that comes into play. But those are some things that are unchanged usually, or are changed only with input from lots of people. If you ask for $1 million and you get it, you just go ahead and spend two, right? Why not? Wasn't approved, right? Well, if you said it could be done in July, you go ahead. December's not a big deal, right? It's a big deal, right? So this is one of those things that once the approved schedule comes in, it's a rev, right? Rev 1, 1.1, those kind of things all the way through. So those are usually changed by board. I like this graphic. It's in your book. But you've got the method, tool, the model, and information. That all together eventually rolls into what's known as a schedule, okay? And the schedule incorporates things like, what if you need a crane to lift a 100-ton air handler to the roof, right? Was it Galileo that said if you get the lever long enough, you can lift this, right? How big a lever do you need to lift a 100-ton crane onto the roof, right? I mean, 100-ton air handler on the roof, you can't, right? So here's the thing. Just go to Walmart, right? Gets you a 300-ton crane, right? No big deal. Walmart says that you can like adopt children, buy furniture, finance a house. You can get a good crane there, can't you? What do you do? Has anybody ordered a big crane or a piece of equipment? What do you have to do?
You got to wait for it.
Where is it? They don't just have them all over the place, right? There might be 50 in the United States. Okay? There are multi-million-dollar devices that are all over the place. You got to get licenses to move them. When you get out here, you got to have people that can operate them. Depending how long it is, you got to have fuel for them. You got to have a licensed driver, a licensed operator. You got to have the soil for, right? If the wind's blowing over a certain speed, you can't move. So just to do a lift, well, gee, that lift, God, it just takes 15 minutes to move that 100-ton crane. We'll do it tomorrow afternoon. Not unless you've already got it here, right? You see what happens to things? You think it's no big deal, but it's a big deal. Let me ask you this. Y'all, everybody at the house probably got a 6-foot step ladder, right? How many of you got a 20-foot step ladder? I'm coming to your house. I'll be there tomorrow. No. Well, I don't have one. So if I'm going to get on my roof, I can't. Oh, well, I'm not, because it's 6 feet. I'm, what, 2 feet tall, and I got to jump. So if I need an 8 or a 12-foot ladder to get on my roof, okay? So if I'm going to do stuff, I got to find a ladder. I'm not going to go buy one. So I've got neighbors that have them, but what if they go on vacation, right? I got a neighbor down the street, he can't move. Because I need his stuff. He can't leave, right? Or if he does, he's got to find somebody that's got the same stuff. But you see what I mean? Things have got to be in place unless you own stuff. And here's the problem. If I go buy a 20-foot ladder, and I go buy a compressor, and I go buy a welder, and I go, what am I? I'm broke, right? And so all these things come into play, right? All that stuff we got to think about as we're rolling forward. Now keep in mind, he may or may not have said this, the scope baseline is 3 pieces. The scope statement, which is developed by the team, that tells you what's going to be done. Anybody, did he mention what scope is? Think of scope as a fence. What do fences do?
Stuff in and stuff out.
You got a dog or a cat or a child, the fence keeps out, right? If you have a swimming pool, in, right? You got a swimming pool, what's the fence do? Right? So we're always thinking with scope, what's in, what's out. Now, depending on your client, you may have to be very specific about what's not in. Okay? Sometimes you just have to tell them what's in, but again, there's that approach. You got to know your client. You also got a WBS and a WBS dictionary. What do you think the WBS dictionary is? Yeah, like a data. What's F name? It's not a curse word, but first name, right? What is first name? Well, it's 10 to 32 characters. It's the given name, right? What's L name? Last name. So we have data dictionaries that describe, is it a character, is it a number, right? Those kind of things. Same thing here. The WBS tells us what are the elements that make up that piece, and that's what that's about. So those three pieces equal the scope baseline. That's important to know, okay? That's how it relates. So, there are, now has he gone through any of these? We've seen these. I call it a 4-3-1, inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs, ITOs, right? So the inputs are things that come in. Did he mention to you that often an output becomes an input to something else? That's what you'll see a lot of, okay? When we have these data flow diagrams and stuff. You got the plans, the charter, the, can you tell me what EAFs and OPAs are?
Yeah.
Enterprise?
Enterprise.
He did? Okay. And so an enterprise environmental factor is what?
Within the company, affects the policy.
Okay. It's something you have no control over, right? Now, what's an OPA? Organizational process asset. What's that? That's internal. That's templates and resources and way. That's what makes your division different than somebody else's division. That's things like at my house, there are things that the Mayfield house does, the traditions, those kinds of things, okay? Did he tell you that you're not an asset? Do you know that you're not an asset? Sorry to tell you that. What are you? Well, I'm a, don't say that. No, it's, you're an enterprise environmental factor. Because here's the deal. When you first started, when you came to the organization, you had zero value. You could process oxygen. Some of you better than others, right? But let me ask you this. If you have to ask where the bathroom is, what value do you have to the organization, right? So first couple of days as a new employee, you've got no value. It's like a kid. Why would you ever have a child? They got no value. You bring them home, you got to feed them, clothe. That thing says 25 pounds, that's all it'll hold. It will not hold any more than that, right? You got to change it over. But I mean, the thing is, the first couple of days, there's no value. But why do you bring a new employee in? Exactly. So let me ask you this. If I train you and I give you challenging assignments, in 3, 6, 12 months, what have you become? Right? You're a factor. And so you're an enterprise environmental factor. I can't control you. I cannot make you do good work. I can give you tools, I can train you, I can give you challenging things to do, but I can't make you work. So you're a factor, not an asset. Because here's the thing. This will never be anything but a computer, right? It won't. This will not be, you know, a bread maker, a toaster. I mean, it's a computer. An asset doesn't change, and that's PMI's definition. And I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just saying it is the PMI PMP exam, right? So they call you an enterprise environmental factor. So when you're looking at people, think of them as EEFs, okay? EEFs, OPFs, right? Those are inputs to lots and lots of processes. You will see this. Expert judgment, analytical techniques in meetings are huge tools and techniques. Did he tell you the difference between a tool and a technique? A tool is a whisk. A technique is whipping meringue. That's a technique. So a tool is tangible. A template, a computer, a marker. A technique would be like Delphi technique, an anonymous technique we would use. Or, you know, different facilitation things that we could do. Things that don't have, they're not tangible. Those are techniques, right? So those are expert judgment, analytical techniques. And then the output is the schedule management plan. Okay? And then that will become the input to all the other planning pieces within this process, right? So here's the deal. The project management plan, and in these slides, I don't know if Rod told you, the stuff in red is where that came from. So the project management plan is the output from developed project management plan in the integration chapter. right? The project charter, that's the very first thing you did, right? You came to the charter, the authorization document, okay? Rolling through enterprise environmentals, organizational process assets, and then you bounce over to risk. Why would we talk about risk in time management?
It's the risk of not doing something in time.
Exactly, right? If I'm going to have a wedding on June 17th, 2016, or 2017, or what, if I don't get it done, if I don't have the dress, if I don't have the people, if I don't have the invitation, right, it doesn't happen, right? That's what risk is. A lot of people think risk is personal safety and health, and that is big time stuff, but there's risks of spending too much money, there's risk of things not happening, there's risk of the product not being the right one. All those things come into play, right? And so risk in time management is important, because if we're not careful, we don't plan enough time, we don't do the right things. That's why that comes into play, right? And so Rob will talk more about it, the probability and definition. He will talk about some of the various tools that can be used that can help you with risk. And in some cases, you will come up with an exact number for risk. When you're doing qualitative risk, for example, I didn't know this. I was doing some work at UT, one of the building programs, and we were sitting around talking. And I assumed, I mean, I'm a UT graduate, I assumed with UT on the river, they would have a flood plan. Makes sense, doesn't it? They don't. You know why? Because the dams and everything where they are, they're about 30 feet above where any potential, it would take like a 1 million year, you know, God would have to take the rainbow back for it to flood. So what they've chosen to do as an organization, that is a watch list kind of thing. You know, if it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, they may have to look at a risk plan, but or a flood plan. But does that make sense? So qualitative says there are some things we just know. We're not doing this. You know, if you're looking at criticality and the things you're looking at don't have any chance of causing a reaction, then you don't have to worry about stuff like that. Does that make sense? That's the qualitative. That doesn't mean it's guessing. That's best practice, things like that. Now, quantitative, when you're doing waste movements and things like that, there's some real data that says if this particular element and this particular element get within a certain proximity, things go off, right? You've known some people like that, right? And I always wondered when I went to NASA, this thing that said LOX was here, and this thing that said liquid hydrogen was about a mile over here. You know, you see these space programs, somebody light it up. There's no lighting it up. You just do that and it's gone, right? So there are known things that happen, right? There's risk. When you go to NASA, the liquid oxygen's over here, the liquid hydrogen's over here, and only like 8 minutes before they launch, they put them in the, you know, the spacecraft before they go, right? And so those kinds of things are part of the risk world that we know about, quantitative and qualitative. Again, Rob will speak more on that. Now, there are some tools and techniques. There are three. You will see these over and over. One of the things he may or may not have told you, when you see this thing that looks like a chest piece or a life vest, life raft, life circle, whatever, those will be used over and over. So anytime you see that, expert judgment is probably the most used tool out there. Bring in somebody who knows more than you do, you know, let them help you out, right? And so if you've never done a plan, if you've never done a WBS, bring somebody in that has. Join PMI, go to a meeting. That's some great stuff where that's found. Analytical techniques are all kinds of things, right? How do you plan time? And how do you know that a new developer can do 20 lines of code a day and an intermediate can do 32 lines of code and an expert can do 50? How do you know that? Well, it's because our team, right? You know those things. Those are techniques that you use. If you don't know that stuff, guess what? LexisNexis, do a Nexus search, you can find that stuff. There's data on everything. How do they know that it takes 6 quarts of oil from my Mercedes 320 and it takes 17 minutes to change the oil? Thousands and thousands and thousands of oil changes, right? So they've got that data. The point is, when you're doing a plan, there's lots of stuff out there to help you out. Don't forget to take advantage of it, right? There's meetings. The single biggest waste of corporate time on the planet, right, is a meeting. I always look at a meeting like this. The average human that's in a professional kind of white-collar world, fully loaded, is probably somewhere around $120,000 a year, fully loaded. Now, you may be less, you may be more, but what's $120,000 a year equal to? $60 an hour, $1 a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? every 60 seconds that I spout something out, this is costing 40 bucks, right? You see how that, if you look at a meeting, it's like, think about how many people are in a meeting that shouldn't be there. $1 a minute per person in the room, right? Think about the ting, right? So meetings are definitely things that are worthwhile, proper meetings though, right? Right people, right time, things like that. Rod will talk a lot more. He's got stuff like that planned. We co-teach this, we've bounced back and forth. The schedule plan though talks about the model, the level of accuracy. Are you going to go down to the penny? Are you going to round to the nearest hundred? All those kinds of things that you look at. For your hour, you round to the hour. The company I work for wants 15 minutes, right? So it all depends on what you do. That's the level of accuracy we're talking about. And if you don't know that, you can get into some trouble or at least be called into the office and educated, right, on those kinds of things. Things like units of measure. Are you going to use milliseconds? Are you going to, what's star date? Well, what are you going to use, right? For your, most of us are probably going to use the hour, right? The other thing is, what's the procedure links? In other words, when you put your time in as an engineer in the design group, where does that go? Somebody's got to pay for that time, right? So there's a link somewhere in there that says, I belong to Fred, and Fred belongs to Sue, and Sue belongs, right? And you kind of roll that up. So when these budgets roll up, how much money do you need, and all those kinds of stuff, right? That happens. Somebody in the back world knows that. There's the maintenance, there's thresholds, for example. Can anybody here go to the store and buy something for the company? Okay? Do you have a P card, or do you have a, how much can you sign for? Well, 500 or 1,000 or 10,000, or can anybody here sign for a new building? No? There's nobody that can, right? It goes before Congress, those kind of things. So you have thresholds, don't you? You can buy pencils, and then somebody can buy a computer, and then somebody can buy network stuff, somebody can buy a truck, unless you're Johnny Cash and do one piece at a time, right? But all the things that you can do, there's all that stuff that goes on, right? And so those are those thresholds in terms of time that we deal with, okay? How often do you report? Morning reports, weekly reports, daily reports, what do you roll up? All those things we got to think about, right? Again, boring stuff, but it's on the exam, so it's important. This is called data flow diagram. There are 47 of these in the PMI PMBOK, right? Project Management Body of Knowledge. Each one of these has a layout, and it's hard to see because this is not very well done, but believe it or not, there's a grayed out area that rolls around here. Anything inside the grayed out area is within that knowledge area, okay? So we're in project time management, and the darker one of these boxes is the particular process we're looking at, plan schedule management. And if you notice, the light gray stuff is outside the knowledge area. The dark black stuff is within the knowledge area, right? Did he explain that? Again, I don't want to bore you. I just want to make sure you know where stuff's coming from. So here's what you ought to do. You ought to write down 11.2 and 11.4. And when you get a chance, flip to it, and you will see that the schedule management plan is an input to identify risks and perform quantitative risk management. The way it works, outputs become inputs. That's kind of how that stuff flows. That's why I think these are real important when you're studying. Now, you have inputs and you have outputs. What's missing? If it were me, and I'm not real bright, I was born in Tennessee, mountains, right? When people were asking about my shoes, I said, well, in Tennessee, you take a pair and leave a pair. When we leave the state, you got to take a pair. When you come back, you got to leave them, right? At the airport. We don't wear shoes here. But so I realized that here's the deal. Inputs and outputs. What if I wrote tools and techniques right here? And then, because Rod will give you these PDFs of these things, and a great way to study once you've read the chapter is they're the processes you have to deal with. Each process has a data flow diagram. If you wrote tools and techniques somewhere on this page, you've got one sheet of paper that you could study that entire process very easily without having to lug that big book around. So that's a nice tool that people sometimes use. Okay, and that's the way that works. So we have inputs and we have outputs, okay? Now, there's always a learning check. You guys can look at that. We're just going to plow through, and all the answers are on there. Here's where it becomes important in sequencing. For the next few, this is mission critical. The very first thing we do in time management is we have to define the activities. Where do the activities come from? Right? So if I'm going to replace a gyro on the Hubble Space Station, what do I probably have to do? I said the words replace.
Take the other one.
Okay. Got to take the old one out. What else do I have to do?
Have a new one.
Have a new one with me. What else am I probably going to have to do? Anybody ever operated in space with a drill? What does a drill tend to do in space? You go, right? Because there's nothing to, there's no gravity, right? So you probably have to stand somewhere. You've got to get somebody out there. You've got to do, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into that happening. You got to get them there. You got to capture. You got to move it in. The Hubble is big enough that it could tear the arm off the space shuttle. So you got to get in sync, in sync, and you got to pull things. There's a lot of stuff that goes on to make that work, right? They practice and do all kinds of things. So when we're defining activities, we're thinking about the task. Paint your closet. Big deal, right? What do you? I got to take out the clothes. I got to, put them. Where am I going to put them? You're going to lay them on the floor. You're going to hang them somewhere, right? You go. Who cares? Well, if you have a wife, they don't care, right? You know what I'm saying? So there's things that have to be done. And it's probably not a good idea to paint the cloak closet in the winter, right? So you think about stuff like that, don't you? I mean, there's all this stuff going on. And so when we're planning and defining these activities, all that stuff's got to come in. Are you going, since it's a closet, are you going to use leftover paint? Are you going to use something new? While you're painting, are you going to put a light switch in there and put right? All that stuff, right? My point is, you've got to think that stuff out and think it through. So in defining activities, now notice what's next. We define, we're going to look at these. When you define, once I've got the activities defined, what do I have to now do? Now I sequence them. I got to go to Walmart, I got to go to Publix, I got to go to Kroger, I got to party, and I got to go to the fish store, and I got to go to the butcher, right? Well, those are 5 or 6 places. When do I need to go? Well, the meat and the vegetables, I'll probably wait till the last minute. The canned goods and the breads and stuff, I can get it. Right? You begin to sequence that stuff out, don't you? Who's going to get it? Well, I'm in West Knoxville and my wife's in Maryville, so we'll probably split that work in, right? Those things come into play. Again, when you think about sequencing activities, things like equipment. This room, if I was going to relamp this room, today wouldn't be the best day to do that, right? Tomorrow or Tuesday when there's no thing in here, right? So I'm sequencing my activities there. Those kinds of things come into play. Where are you going to put the old lamps when you take them down? Where are they going to go? Are you going to go to the landfill? Are you going to take them to a recycling place, right? All that stuff comes into play. We sequence it. Once they're sequenced, here's the other thing. If I'm going to replace those lamps, what am I probably going to need? A ladder. If you're our good friends that are in the union world and you work at a national lab, anytime I'm above 4 feet, I've got to have a spotter. Well, let me ask you this. Who's probably going to replace that light bulb? An electrician. You got to have a spotter. Guess who's probably going to be the spotter? Another electrician. Guess what? It takes 30 minutes to replace a light bulb. Fully loaded electrician at Oak Ridge and Whitetail is $100 an hour. So that's going to cost me $100 for 1 hour's work, right? Because it's half hour one guy, half hour the other. Now I say don't think about cost, but I'm thinking about cost, aren't I? And then let me ask you this. Why does European Auto Garage use a laborer to sweep the floor? Why don't they just go ahead and use the automotive technicians? Right? Well, does that mean the automotive technician is above sweeping the floor? No. Right? That's what we're talking about. So we begin to do our sequencing and planning and resources. We got to think about what does that cost? Okay? And those kinds of things come into play. And like I said, if you want a crane, what if a crane's not available? How about a helicopter? Right? How about 2 smaller cranes? So you might have to get creative if the deadline's important, right? Because as we look at these schedules, we have to decide, is the time more important than the cost, than the resource, right? So all these things we've got to think about. Now you do that natively. What I'm trying to give you a little help here is, this is all going on. There are tools for this, okay? And that's what we're doing. Once we know the sequence and any resources, then we can determine the duration. Because a 15-minute lift of a 100-ton air handler takes 20 minutes. But does it take 20 minutes? 3 months out, I got to get a crane. The week before I gotta show up, I gotta get an inspector to make sure that it's properly balanced, all that stuff. I probably wanna have my conduit run, my electrical run. I probably wanna have lots of things in place, don't I? So there's a lot of up to the event kind of thing going on, right? And so one of the things that we like to do, like in a wedding, most ladies like to have a dress. They like, that's right, if you find the dress, the rest of it goes, yes ma'am.
I have a question.
Please.
When you talk about estimating activity resources, that's just people, it's not money.
It's people and things.
People and things.
Right, because if I need paint, where's that gonna come from? If I need a brush, where's that gonna come, or crane, or people, right?
Right.
Well, I need 9 people.
So from there you go money?
Well, from what we do, now keep in mind, yes and no. In the book, you go scope, time, cost. In reality, why do we usually plan the schedule before we plan the budget? Time is money, right? Usually, not always, because 60% of a project's labor, usually, depending on the project. Does that make sense? So there's usually a sequence. Now that doesn't mean you can't do it another way, but in reality, we're doing this at the same time. Keep in mind, I have to present these discreetly as pieces to teach them, but in reality, if I'm thinking I need 9 people, you're thinking, well, I want 9 electricians, or 9 laborers, or 9 carpenters, right? You know, my favorite one at Oak Ridge, there's a category called cake decorator, a labor category. Somebody was actually paid that, right? But anyway, so when we look at it, you're probably doing both, but for this VO here, I've got to talk about time specifically. We're beginning to think time, right? And when I say WBS doesn't include time or money, it does in the back of your mind, doesn't it? You're thinking about time, but a WBS doesn't have time on it. It's work. That's a great question, though. And that would be what I would call an OPA. That's something, an organizational process asset. If you do them together, that's what makes your team unique. If you do them separately, that's also what makes a team unique, right? But in reality, when we're thinking time, most of us are thinking money, right? You're thinking an 8-hour day or a 10-hour day. Do y'all work 10s?
Yes.
8s or 10. So you're thinking 10. So if you're getting paid $100 an hour, you make $4,000 a week, right? If that's what you were getting, $100 an hour, right? So is that true? Do your math right? 100 times 4, yeah. So if you got $4,000 for the week, your boss is probably thinking, if you take a 3-hour lunch,